it's in the Latin America conferences. It's all happening this time around. So.
I met him for the first time almost 8 years ago.
So you're a long time.
Yeah. When he was setting up Briter.
Of course.
Yeah. It sounded quite hypothetical back then. Not so the use case for really well. But over time, it's very useful. Data is the main driver.
Yeah, I think it just gives people a bit more credibility when they have discussions that have some documents that they look at, so I think it helps in that sense. Yeah, we're trying to do the same with agriculture now, so we're doing like a whole separate arm on ag. So we'll see how...
It's something we can also talk about, is we are putting data points for financial institutions that allow them to finance farmers. Along value chains, different value chains, and verticals, and clean tech, etc.
All right, wonderful. Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen, for being here today. I have the pleasure of moderating what we hope will be a very exciting panel discussion. My name is David Longdon. I'm on the investment team at Equator. Equator is a climate venture capital firm that invests across sub-Saharan Africa at the seed and Series A stages. If you're building in mobility, the carbon value chain, renewable energy, and of course, agriculture, please feel free to reach out. I will turn it over to the panel. I will ask everyone to please introduce yourselves, share with the audience a bit why this topic is so important to you, and also so we can judge your life choices, what your favorite African food is.
Hi, everybody. Hello. My name is Martha Haile. I'm the founder and CEO of Abze, which is a digital media and events company. I'm also a co-founder of Hello Tractor, and I also worked at WeFarm. So I've been in the ag tech space for the last 10 years or so. Why am I in agriculture? I don't know. It's hard. I think if you're in ag, you understand how difficult it is, but it's such a critical industry for the entire world, so I do enjoy it here. My favorite food, my family is from Eritrea, so I gotta go with my Eritrean food. Doro sepi, or Doro wat, as some of you may know, with the egg especially, best meal anywhere. Nice to be here.
Hi everyone, my name is Thompson. I run Diligence Africa, and we're an investment advisory firm that provides due diligence services to investors and advisory services to startups. Part of the services we provide to startups are fractional CFO services, accounting services, governance and compliance services, investment readiness training programs, and then we also help founders to fundraise. I think that agriculture is such an very much like you. Agriculture is such an critical sector, for everyone, and it's if we don't eat, then we can't survive. So yes, that's why I'm here. Best food, Nigerian food, because I'm Nigerian. Eforiro and rice. Thank you.
Hi everyone. It's much better. My name is Kenneth. I work with the Catalyst Fund. The Catalyst Fund is an early stage impact VC fund and a venture builder. And we are backing founders who are building climate resilient Africa. So we are a $40 million fund. We've made 22 investments so far. We have 18 more to go. So if you're building something interesting, come and look for me. And out of the 22, about half of them are in ag tech. And my favorite companies in the portfolio are also ag tech companies. And I am, I would say, a fourth generational farmer, so I have many interests in farming. A favorite food, it would come from the coast of Kenya, so a really good biryani with some chicken in it. It's fantastic.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Hangyul. I'm coming from Briter Bridges, which is a data and intelligence company that collects information on companies, investors, ecosystem actors, and other supply chain actors across Africa and other emerging markets as well. I also serve as a data lead for our new program called Abze, which is really what Briter does, but just really specifically focused. Thank you. Let's see if this. Thank you. I guess the microphone doesn't like agriculture, which is just very inappropriate for this occasion. But yeah, so we do this really the similar level of data intelligence, but really focused on ag. So I'm hoping to speak a little bit more about what we're finding from the data from here. My favorite food, I think, is yassa pule. If there is someone who has a good recipe around it, I would love to learn about it. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Philip Odino. I'm the managing partner at Pepea Capital. And Pepea Capital, we focus on supporting farmers to produce for corporate aggregators. We offer both debt and equity solutions for SMEs on that front. I'm keen to see how our experience will contribute to the conversation today, and how we can share what we've learned over the past few years that we've been doing business. To also share with you our shortcomings and things we've learned along the way and how we can grow together. I come from the lakeside part of the country, so I like the small fishes. They're called sardines or omena in local dialect. Some of them are laughing because they know how sweet that meal is. So yeah, I enjoy that meal a lot. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Good to meet you. My weakness, fried yam chips, by the way, I'll admit, using an air fryer because we believe in technology. But let's dive right in. And maybe we'll start with Martha and then with Dami. What are some of the most significant challenges facing agriculture in Africa, and how can AgTech solutions play a role?
Yeah, thank you for that. So I mean, obviously there are a lot of issues and challenges that people continue to talk about. Productivity, just low productivity on the farm, a lack of finance, as well, a lack of the right information actually reaching smallholder farmers. Smallholder farmers are about 80% of the farming population across the continent. But I think something that people don't talk enough about, I want to talk about two areas, is number one, consumer preference. Like what are the consumers actually demanding? What are the consumers actually paying for? I think that we as buyers of these food products actually have a big say in what is grown, how equitable these supply chains actually are. And because food prices are pretty much, they're very low. Like, you know, we can buy food for relatively low prices. Yes, with inflation, sometimes the food prices will go up, as we've seen over the last couple of years. But I think that with food prices so low, you're going to have that pressure go all the way down to the farmer. Across the supply chain, there's pressure, which results in many farmers really just not making that much money. And it's not just an issue in Africa, but it is an issue globally. I think another issue that folks are not talking about, and this is why I just launched a company that is focused on digital media within the food and agricultural sector, is we just don't know enough. Like we, as across the entire agricultural ecosystem, we don't know enough about where our food comes, how we don't have enough pride, to be honest, in our own indigenous crops. There is a much bigger push right now for growing of indigenous crops in our markets. They're actually, you know, they're best suited to be grown in our countries, and yet we tend to eat products that were actually imported here. And so I think that as consumers and as a broader ecosystem, we have to have a better understanding of what's happening within agriculture and take a little bit more care there. So I know we always talk about production, we talk about financing, and I think that, you know, from Hello Tractor, you know, we have a financing facility for tractors. So I absolutely know about those kind of critical issues and the fact that farmers don't have access to credit. But I think that there are a variety of issues that we sometimes kind of, put under the rug, we're not focusing enough on. So I just wanted to mention those for that reason.
Hi. So I think can you hear me? Thank you. So I think in addition to that, I think that what we've seen in the past, actually for the longest time, is that you have situations where farmers don't even have access to, and to your point, don't even have access to feed, don't have access to resources that they need to grow their plants or feed their animals. And what happens is that when you don't have farmers who have access to those resources, then it sort of limits how much production that comes through, and then that goes through the value chain. I would say the other thing is also just, again, access to financing, because again, it's so critical as a farmer. If I don't have access to buy the yield, or sorry, not the yield, buy the feed, or buy the seedlings that I need, or even buy some of the baby animals, then I'm not able to produce or meet. I think there was a pitch going on earlier today, and one of the comments that the founder said was that a farmer would, for example, take loan from a bank, and usually what happens is that they don't meet up to the demand that the banks ask them to produce. But the reason why is because, again, they don't even have what it takes to meet up to the capacity. And so these are some of the restrictions that they have. I would say the other thing is also just trainings. I was speaking to a founder who's building something like a extension officer using his mobile phone, and so essentially giving farmers access to training programs. But what he's been able to do is that he's been able to build a mobile platform where farmers can then use their phones. But if, as a farmer, I don't even have access to the internet, I don't have access to data, I don't have access to smartphones, then how can I access all of these things? One of the other comments earlier today was, as a farmer, you would sort of use WhatsApp groups. If I don't have access to the internet in my locality or in my rural area, then how do I even use WhatsApp, right? So again, those are some of the restrictions that farmers have. And then to the point around solutions, I think the government institutions, DFIs, grant organizations would need to do more in, for example, whether it's accessing loans or even showing farmers what they can do better. I know that one of the concerns is also that because many of these farmers have been in the industry, have been doing this for the longest time. Many of them are, they have generations of farmers. And it's very, for them, they're stuck on, this is how my forefathers used to do it. Why would I change it because of technology? But again, if you show them the right thing, and hopefully with patience, then hopefully they'll take some of those training and adopt it. But again, for farmers that have been in the industry for the longest time, that's, taking them above that, what they have known for the longest time to have worked for them, and making sure that they're trying new skills, they're adopting new skills, but having people that will also sort of work with them to adopt this technology.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And maybe Hangyul and then Ken, how would you say the agtech landscape is evolving, and what are some of the key trends that we should be looking out for moving forward?
Sure, go first. All right, great. Thank you. So I think when we're looking at the agtech sector at large, so not even focusing on the climate-related or climate-resilient agtechs, we're actually looking at a quite vibrant number, about 400 startups within the entire continent, North and Sub-Saharan Africa, working. And when we look at their funding trends, we're able to see that they've raised over 1.5 billion in the last decade. So it's definitely a growing sector, and I think the growth is sometimes a bit concentrated along the coastlines as well as the eastern and southern coastlines, but it's definitely a sector that is growing. In the conversation that we're having, which is a little bit more on the climate smart or climate resilient agtechs that also use or adopt smart technology, I had a bit of a pause on really thinking, what do even people mean when they talk about climate resilient technology? And I think actually tying to what the other ladies were saying, I think oftentimes it can quickly go into certain types of precision ag, it can go into very specific types of hardware, but for the purpose of this, I wanted to actually take a slightly broader look. So we've included things really starting from the soil health all the way to reducing waste through cold storage, as well as circularity that allows waste to be then recreated into fertilizer, etc. And we look at those varieties of companies that do work in climate resilience, because resilience, again, isn't just about being resilient at the time. It also is building resilience for the farmer group, as well as the supply chain, the value chain, so that it is more resilient at the times of shock. We saw that there are actually almost a quarter of all ag techs that we could see in the platform. And I think that they also raise about a quarter of all the fundings that have gone into ag techs in the last decade or so. So I would say climate resilient agriculture is not something that is just arising. I think it's actually been building over time. We do see that companies are beginning to embed certain data-related solutions in their farm management solutions, so that it adds in the weather forecasting, or it adds in areas around climate smart. We're also seeing that with given infrastructure development and whatnot, cold chains are also able to come out. They can actually add quite a bit to these climate-related or climate resilience post-harvest solutions as well. So I would say it's, just to kind of put it briefly, it's AgTech's been growing. I think so has climate-resilient AgTechs. But I do think that we should take a slightly broader look at what climate-resilient AgTechs looks along the entire value chain, and we'll see that that area also has been growing, and technology is being embedded into existing companies as well as new companies that are coming out. Thanks.
Cool. So my perspective is more from the product and distribution feature of the way these companies have been set up. So the trend and what I've seen happen over time is that initially you have founders, agriculture being a very physical, real-world phenomena, right? You have founders who start off, at least the very first batch of them, were purely digital solutions, right? You're trying to do connection to markets, advisory. And what you find is that it's, on one hand, it's quite easy to build those types of companies, but they are, on the other hand, very hard to monetize and to scale, right? So what I've seen in terms of a trend is the pendulum swinging the other way, and people coming back to building companies that are still anchored in that physical reality. So marrying digital and offline services, and some of the best companies that we've seen in our portfolio and in the trends that we continue to see even in the due diligence processes we're looking for startups is they've found a way. For example, you were mentioned the agronomist who is building content, right? So what we've seen is that a company that brings using tech, builds, hires a lot of agronomists, so it becomes almost like a traditional business. But on the other hand, because they have technology and they're able to come to the farm and register all the details and find out what you're growing, and then give you, and then use technology, the soil health, your crops, your region, the market, and the tech is able to make that work easier for them. So ultimately, people coming back as founders to that reality that agriculture is physical and we can make it better with digital is sort of what we've come to. It looks like an obvious lesson, but it's taken a long time to get there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Philip, on to you. Was hoping you could share with us, you touch on the intersection between agtech and fintech, the role that financial services plays, particularly as it relates to making farmers on the continent more resilient.
Thank you, David, for that. So for the past 3 years, we've been having conversations with financial institutions, mostly banks, on ways on how we can unlock debt capital to finance smallholder farmers mostly. The beauty of the smallholder farmer is that the ticket sizes are very small, but at the same time, they have the highest level of default rates because of things like crop failure and stuff like that. So we've been working towards building data points that can help financial institutions make robust financial decisions on whether to invest or not. Because the biggest issue, the business is actually in recovery of funds. Deployment of funds is not difficult, and that's very easy and can be done as simple as using M-Pesa and stuff like that. But now, how do you collect back the debt that you've issued this farmer? So we have iterated multiple models that we've done over the years. And what we came to find that makes a lot of business sense is that the banks are willing to work with the farmers if the market is actually guaranteed. Meaning, can we collect our cash upon production? So on that front, we have MOUs with corporate aggregators, as I mentioned, for example, Unilever, who have a quota on their sustainability model that they have to source from farmers in sub-Saharan Africa. So having Unilever as one of your biggest off-takers, then the loan becomes less risky. So these funds can be deployed, the farmers can produce, and we deduct the cost of the loans before the farmer is actually paid. Also, what we've embedded on our platform, I'm happy that our CTO is here, so later after this you can find him and he can explain how that works better. So we've embedded e-vouchers in our delivery system. So at no point do the farmers access cash in its liquid form, because we found that farmers, once they get this cash, they use this money for other needs apart from the actual production process. So you find that the default rates are not based on things like a crop failure and stuff like that, but just bad manners on the farmer's part. Okay? So through that, we've come up with multiple co-lending models that some are being piloted, some have been deployed. We have seen high success rates in crops that have short cycles of 3 to 4 months. These crops allow us to collect and iterate our model faster, and we get to find things that work and things that do not work. Okay? So the beauty is that the financial institutions are now listening. Big players like the African Development Bank are willing to scale down the SME guarantee model, which they use for other commercial banks, to try that with fintechs and to see if that can actually work. The ticket can be reduced, and maybe some of the terms can be waived because we're using data as our information basis. Okay, so those are new models that are coming up, and hopefully that we'll be able to deploy this also in other value chains, because at the moment, it's working really well in the cereals value chain, but livestock is quite difficult to track. I'm happy to hear from the team if anyone has worked in the livestock value chain, and which data points have you been able to deploy on that, and how did it work for you? Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Philip. Maybe we can move on. I'll start with you, Hangyul. What some of the major barriers to the adoption of AgTech solutions are from your perspective, and if there are any ways to alleviate some of those barriers you've seen that have been successful?
Sure. Because we look at the data from kind of the startup to investor as the demand and supply, I'll really describe it from that perspective rather than that one more layer down, which is really more farmer experience and whatnot. When we do look at let's say that we assume that capital injection into the ecosystem means that there's more resources for these companies to grow, do R&D, acquire new customers, acquire customers that are harder to reach. So that's the assumption that I'm making when I'm talking about the challenges that will follow with it. When we make that assumption, even though there is a lot of funding going into the sector, I mean, they're quite concentrated in very specific companies. We see some success cases that end up taking about 80% of the overall volume, right? So the rest, you look at it and they're really looking at small ticket size, just smaller early stage deals. And I think what we're not seeing is that Well, when we look at these early stage deals, I think the good sign is that there is not just all private capital. There does seem to be a lot of private and public capital that are working together just to make sure the researchers that do need to actually go into building a sound product is working. But I don't know if that is actually really leading to the next stage, which is then connecting them to the right. I'm not even talking really growth capital here. We're talking seed capital, pre-seed even at the model. I don't think that those early stage companies that are really developing some sort of business model is having the opportunity to actually go into the market and try their models in the market. So I would say that to me is a type of problem that's standing out the most, is really that almost valley of death of some sort after that really, really early stage. Even though those companies get funding, I think a lot of them do fail, which, across the entire startup ecosystem, you'll see that type of a drop-off, and I think that's kind of a natural thing that happens in an ecosystem. But I think with ag tech, because it's also so related to livelihoods as well as how that impacts overall economy, I do see that there's a lot more public partners that come into that early stage, and I think just to also utilize those public capital wisely as it grows, the companies should also be connected a little bit better to the next stage they need to go to be able to actually grow a little bit more. And even with the private capital that the companies do see after they make it to those seed stage or even further, I think because agriculture in some senses is so rooted to quite literally the ground that they operated in, I think the scalability of how ag tech goes, I think it's worth actually seeing if they should be measured in a similar way that other type of startups are scaled at. If not every single model is actually going to work, when you're looking at rice farming versus a different type of crop farming. So there's a lot more complexities in the way that these companies seem to consider when they're actually scaling and growing. I don't have answers as to what it is, but I think the challenge might be that the scaling model for a lot of ag techs, I think, are being judged in a similar way to how other startups are, and I don't think that that's intuitively correct, nor I think business model-wise correct. So that's what I'll say. Thanks.
Dami, any thoughts to add on barriers to adoption?
I think.
Hello? Oh, sorry. I would focus on two. So I would say the first one is infrastructure. And I'd say infrastructure because the agri value chain cuts across so many sectors. Energy, storage, logistics, internet. And because of that, it is such a, I would say, fragile sector. And generally what happens is that, again, I always like to give examples when I'm saying, so I was speaking to an investor who's looking to invest in a company who's produced a product that can extend the lifespan or shelf life of an agri product for 6 months. And that is so mind-blowing because then you can use it for tomatoes, you can use it for different types of crops that typically don't last even one day when you're taking them from one state to the other, right? So again, I would say that infrastructure is such a big thing because where storage facilities are not available, then this type of solution then makes it easier for farmers to go long distances, go do long hauls for their farm produce. The second thing would be again just thinking about how. I lost my train of thought.
No, that's perfectly okay. And I think the next, we're continuing on that theme. Maybe we can pass it over to Ken for examples of either successful or unsuccessful implementations of ag tech solutions and what we can learn from those case studies.
Cool. So actually, just pick it up from what you were saying. Being a venture builder, a venture building firm. We've spent hundreds of hours working with ag techs who are, bringing their solutions to market, right? And so the typical question is, how do we get more adoption? How do we get more users? And, we've run different kinds of experiments on product and distribution. But ultimately, it is really the simple things that call the difference. It's just value, right? If you can demonstrate value to the farmers, they will pay for it. Even if your tech is bad, even if you don't have the best channels, they'll just go out of their way to use it because they have to use it, right? And To use a real-life example, there's a company we've invested in Tanzania. It's called Mazao Hub. They've managed to get maybe 30,000 farmers or so every year to pay them a monthly subscription, which is, something that not many people have managed to do. And it's because of the simple things, right? If I subscribe to the service once a season, I'll get a soil test that's instant, and I know exactly what I need in terms of fertilizer. But it's just, then it goes beyond there, right? Because then they can give you the exact fertilizer you need. They'll deliver it to your location. They'll send an agronomist to guide you at every single stage. So looking back, it's just the fact that they have value at every single stage. And even when their tech is still developing, being an early stage company, they still have people willing to pay for their service, for people to come, for an agronomist to come, for someone to have deliveries done. So that's one of the more successful companies I've seen. They've doubled their revenue, since they started. They're about $1 million this year, and that's one of the most exciting parts of doing this, is seeing when value is created, people will go through any obstacle in between them to get it.
No, thank you. That's really helpful. Create value, and then you can capture it. Maybe we can move on, Martha, to you. Oftentimes when we discuss ag tech and innovative solutions, we tend to lean more towards software. Could you talk to us about the role hardware plays, and in particular hardware innovation plays, as it relates to ag tech on the continent?
Can you guys hear me? Hello? Yes. Okay. Can I also just follow up on this one?
Please.
Okay. I think for farmers too, a few reasons why they may not adopt these, tech solutions. Number one is they're working with 1 to 2 seasons per year for the majority of farmers here. So there's not a lot of opportunity to actually test new products and services, right? And there's a lot riding on it. They don't have a lot of money to actually play with. Obviously, unfortunately, our smallholder farmers really are some of the poorest people within our society. And again, this is globally, right? And so there's a huge need to share risk with the farmers. And if they don't see it, it's going to be very difficult for them to make a decision to try some new kind of tech, some new seed, a new fertilizer. And fertilizer is actually a great example because, the government is subsidizing fertilizer, but we have a regenerative movement. So if we want then farmers to have and adopt organic fertilizer, why would they do that if subsidized fertilizer is much cheaper, right? And so I think that there's a lot of kind of these macro level conditions that prevent them from actually adopting the type of risk that they need to adopt these new products and services. Also, just on a final note, there's also a lot of innovations out there. I went to this person. He's the CEO of an association that oversees 30,000 farmers across Kenya. I think 30 to 50,000. And he said to me once, he's like, "Well, why should I adopt your app? There's 210 apps out there nowadays. Like, is yours actually going to work?" I don't know. We're testing it, and so these are some of the reasons why. I think in terms of this hardware versus software, hardware is, capital intensive. And I think that when it comes to tractors, as an example, because that's my background, there's really a lack of understanding of, sadly, I think, of the type of impact that tractors can have on production. And this is why you see less than 2% of agricultural investment across the continent invested into mechanization. Although it's proven that mechanization can 2x yields on farm, right? We know it, it's been proven. There's tractors that are involved in production globally, and yet there's only 1% of investment. Why? Because the majority of investment in agriculture goes into seed and fertilizer. So I think that, because machinery is so expensive, tractors might be the most expensive, but then you have kind of the irrigation pumps as well, which increasingly is being invested into, such as sun culture, which I think some of you guys are investing in, and that's a great thing. And I think we just have to have more understanding of what can actually create faster impacts within agriculture and start putting our money there. those financing flows for all my VCs up here. You got to start diversifying where we're actually putting that money when it comes to agriculture.
Completely agree. As an investor, we love hardware and software, so we'll make that plug for Equator. Philip, maybe over to you. Could you give us some context as to who the different stakeholders are in the value chain that are investing in ag tech solutions, and any sort of advice, feedback, thoughts you have on the development of that ecosystem?
Thank you, David. Maybe also before I answer that, let me follow on the question you asked on which areas have succeeded, which solutions have failed, okay? I wouldn't say solutions have failed. I might say they were either too early in the game, and the farmers and the ecosystem were not ready to adopt some of those technologies, or they were way late after guys had moved on to other things that make sense to them. So what we have experienced in that front is that for us, we use data a lot to make our financial decisions, both debt and equity. And we've discovered that a lot of this information is siloed within startups. Okay, you've mentioned Mazao Hub, and that data, I'm sure, is within that startup, unless it's shared by the team and upon request, and also with your team. We will prefer, I would suggest, if possible, if we could have an open source platform, a repository, where some of these data points can actually be aggregated, and maybe we can either pay to get access to them, so that we can compare data across platforms, so that we do not have solutions that fail because they are launched in areas where maybe guys have moved on from that space, or in value chains that don't need that kind of intervention at the moment. In terms of stakeholders and, and people who can support our initiatives, I prefer working with the government more, the government of the day, in that area of jurisdiction. Because some of the things that we try to build in the private sector, the government has already built these things in terms of systems and also ministries within their business models. It's just that some of these things are not efficient, or we don't know they exist, or they are black boxes that we don't know how to navigate as private players out here. Secondly, the private sector is led majorly through profits, and some of the stakeholders who want to work with us, their agenda is not profit driven. So what I've discovered, some stakeholders don't want to work together because their agenda is not aligned. These guys are keen on, let's say, making the world a better place in terms of equity and stuff like that. The other player is keen on impact. The other one is keen on profit margins and stuff like that. If all this agenda are not aligned together, it's difficult for us to work with one another. That's why if the government of the day comes in and sets a platform where all of us can actually play, it will be actually really beneficial. And in forums like this, it would be nice to have governments represented, because yes, we're here and we're discussing private sector interventions, but it would be nice to hear what the government thinks about that particular aspect of business we're trying to roll out. So to go to place first is normally government, then I can cascade my engagement across board. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Philip. Dami, did you want to add any thoughts on the interactions between private and public sector, how more enabling ecosystems can be developed in this space?
Yes. So again, I think there was another example. There was a conversation earlier around what big corporates can do for startups. And someone, I think Jessica on the panel, mentioned accelerators. But again, in addition to that, one of the things that I think has been, that has worked in the market is also thinking about, for a big corporate, what are we trying to achieve? What are the things that we don't necessarily need to, put our foot on? And what can we partner with a smaller startup that is doing, really well in the industry? What can we partner with them on to build for us? It doesn't have to be an acquisition, could be a partnership, but again, some of the concerns that I know that some big corporates have had is they have standards for what kind of crops, what kind of products they want, startups to be.
About the crossing between crop and livestock, and what do you think? I mean, what would be your projection, your thinking about this crossing? Thank you.
Anyone specific or the whole crew? Everyone can answer. Yeah, okay. So that's kind of to everyone. You've got a question of the future of the biggest threat to the future of. We are pointing. Yes. Now is what happened? See, I asked earlier. What was my English is not understood. No, here you go.
Yeah, we were still loading. Yeah, I'm Timothy Nasibi from Vihiga County government. So I have two questions. And I'm also a founder of a startup. I just wanted to find out whether we could maybe elucidate on how carbon credits and the agricultural sector can work, especially with the aspect of sustainable farming and sustainable farming practices. And also, coming from the government sector, how can we make public-private partnerships work? What approach is the best? Because we have also been having certain initiatives in the county, in Vihiga County, but also due to bureaucracy, there have been certain delays. Now, I don't know what...
Delays in the government or in the private sector?
Delays in the government. Delays in the government. And also, there isn't exactly a good framework for collaboration within the private sector. So how can we make it work so that it's easier, faster, and more efficient? Thank you.
So a government official moonlighting as a startup founder has deep questions? I think it's everyone. I think everybody has a microphone. Let's, just to keep time, I'd suggest we do it quick and then we...
Yeah, so first question. Do you remember the questions? Yeah.
So the first question was, over the next 8 to 80 years, what are the biggest risks Africa's agricultural sector face? The second question was and correct me if I'm wrong, the go-between between livestock and crops. And you elaborated on that a little bit, yeah. So what does that look like? Third one was a double question of what will it take for government to work better with PPPs? He is from government, but I think he's asking what suggestions or frameworks we can provide them. And your second question, which was the first question, was carbon credits. How do we translate carbon credits into agriculture? Thank you very much. Thank you. I went to school, ladies and gentlemen. I was educated. Yes.
So on the first one, I would say that one of the challenges that I foresee is that I think farmers honestly would just like get tired of farming because it's so hard. And they'll start to farm for themselves, for like their immediate, I just want to eat now. I'm not thinking about, the next house. I just want to feed my family, and I'm not, thinking, in terms of bigger dreams. And that would again trickle down to the value chain, to the big corporates, because then they don't have enough production. So I do think that big corporates, institutions, investors, fund managers, people need to start thinking more critically about how everything that they do it will potentially impact agricultural value chains. And again, based on what I said earlier around how agri touches on literally every sector, energy, logistics, supply chain, everything, all of those sectors are critical. Because if you're only funding, and I understand the need as a fund manager to say, we're only ag tech focused. But again, ag tech touches on every other sector. If the logistics in Kenya or in Nigeria or in Ghana is messed up, then the crops are not going anywhere. You're going to face issues with post-harvest losses. But again, there are companies that are building for those solutions. But I think honestly that would be the challenges with the future farm.
I want to answer that one too, because the other questions are a little bit harder. So I'm going to leave that for you guys. I think for the future, I think the really interesting point about the global food system is that we're at an inflection point. In the 70s, we had the Green Revolution. There's crop science that came out that prevented people from mass starvation globally. we have to change. The planet is unhealthy, people are unhealthy, farmers are poor. And so right now, there's a lot of conversation and there's different money flows happening to change how agriculture actually is produced and how it's happening. So to me, the key question here is, where is Africa in this conversation and in this change? And how do we make sure that Africa, if we want to feed the future, which I believe many people in Africa actually believe can happen, how do we actually have the place at the table and have a voice at a global level so that we can impact the change that is about to come? Because as everybody talks in agriculture, this population boom that we're talking about by 2050, which Nigeria is going to be a massive part of that, but Africa as a continent is, we have to be able to feed them. And so that's kind of the key question that I think all ag techs are really thinking about this right now, is like, how do we ensure that we have the right R&D, we have the right technology, whether it's robots, drones, tractors, all of the tech that we need to actually be much more innovative than we are now, so that we can feed the world.
And maybe I'll just respond to one of the questions around the link between agriculture and climate finance, at least as it relates to carbon credits. I think the short answer is there is immense potential. You think about the fact that around 60% of the world's uncultivated arable land is on the continent. You think about the fact that soil is actually one of the biggest carbon sinks available in the world, and that land use changes actually have the ability to embed carbon in soils. I think there's incredible potential there as it relates to managing, this I think also speaks to the second question, managing pastoralists, for example, the way livestock engage with grazing, the way farmers engage with soil health. I think they're very important questions that can be asked and answered as it relates to increasing carbon stocks in our soils. Some of the biggest challenges to that has been how to measure that and how to validate that. It's a question at Equator we're very excited about. We recently invested in a startup called Downforce Technologies that has actually developed a digital platform to measure soil organic carbon cheaply at scale. Can measure current stocks, can look back at historical stocks, and also identify areas of land, whether it's 1 hectare or thousands of hectares, that have the most potential to sequester carbon. And so I think there's incredible potential both with agtechs to think about how to engage in climate finance, but also levels up thinking about counties, national governments, as it relates to engaging in ITMOs and trading carbon based on natural geographies and demographics. So there's huge potential there.
Cool. So on carbon credits, so 2 things. In the business that you find yourself in, you need to check if there is a potential application for it, and I'll give you 2 examples. One is a company whose founder is, I saw here earlier, Farm to Feed. They take food that could have otherwise been wasted and put it to good use. And in their case, the rotting food emits a lot of greenhouse gases, and so they had to find a new model for that and a new way to calculate that. And so that's one way that it typically happens. On the other hand, there are the more stable and proven models of, for example, people know that if you have biochar, it sequesters carbon. And so there's also a really good company you should check out called Biological. And in their case, they are making biochar at scale and using that as a fertilizer and a soil additive that still goes back to soil health. And on your other question about the government, the one thing I would say is that we would want there to be consistency, so that even between government changes, we know that there are still people implementing and working on what we agreed on. So that gives us the comfort to then be able to commit resources, whether they're time, money, and to even think about how do we innovate together.
Yes. I would like to address the point on government, because we work very closely with them. I'll speak to the county government context. So every county government has a CIDP, a County Integrated Development Plan, that guides what that county government is looking to set priorities on for the next 5 years that they are in existence. So what we encourage our founders and also our other partners to sit down with government officials, because these documents are readily available online, and also if you go to the county government offices, right? And you take time and study this document and see where your intervention actually falls into. So that by the time you're having an audience with the CECs or with the actual governor himself, then your pitch is airtight and it actually gets the job done. What we've seen is that the private sector players come with these audacious, beautiful ideas, but they do not rhyme with what the county government is trying to look at that time. So they find a mismatch and no work is done and time is wasted. So I think that is what I can say about that.
David, do you want to close your panel? Just say thank you to everyone?
Yes, he said I should say thank you, so thank you guys. But no, honestly, it really has been a pleasure. Thank you for your questions and your engaging conversations. I would also like to give a round of applause to our panelists.
Well done. Thank you so much, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to have your seats. Thank you so much for taking the time, David. Well done. Fantastic. Fantastic.